Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this plenary session of the International Transport Forum, where for the next hour and 15 minutes or thereabouts, we'll be exploring the theme, the governance of urban access and mobility. Now, in a few moments, we'll be hearing from some very special guests, but before we do, can I remind you that you will have the opportunity to make comments or indeed put questions to them in the proceedings. Microphones will be available, so if you wish to speak, then please raise your hand. One will be brought to you, and if you could also introduce yourself and the organisation that you represent, that would also be extremely helpful. Now, I want to open these proceedings by referencing some statistics. Every day around the world, people undertake 10.5 billion trips. By 2030, 60% of the global population will be living in cities. It's thought that in the same period, over 2 billion people will have probably joined the ranks of the middle classes, with many living in emerging market cities. Now, if these numbers stack up, then megacities with a population of over 10 million people could be the new reality. And for car manufacturers at least, that will be a bonus. Automobile sales are tipped to rise from the 70 million a year in 2010 to 125 million by 2025, with more than half of those purchases occurring in cities. The numbers are fascinating, yet they're also worrying. Meeting the demands of a growing population imposes multiple challenges on cities, those who live in them, and the planners responsible for ensuring that we get from A to B. Transport networks have become so complicated, in fact, that there have been occasions when policy and decision-making rarely incorporate the implications arising from the way that land is used and the effects that those decisions can have on different places. Perhaps it also reflects the at times confusing organisation behind our transport networks and the fact they are often overseen by a diverse chain of agencies reporting to multiple groups. A 2014 paper by the UK organisation, the Campaign for Better Transport, tackled the issue up front with the suggestion that transport decisions within England should be devolved away from Westminster, the heart of government, to deliver better services, public spaces, managed roads, and more support for cycling and walking. Yet we shouldn't assume that smooth transport governance is an impossibility. In the French city of Montpellier, for example, the local authority promoted carpooling schemes whilst limiting the number of parking spaces. There are, of course, other examples of how strong transportation policies have arisen as a result of sensible political initiatives coupled with creative thinking. I know that it's a subject that has been analysed in some detail by Harvard University's Graduate School of Design with its project Transforming Urban Transport, the Role of Political Leadership. Now, in a few moments, you will be hearing from Professor Diane Davis, who will discuss that project, its objectives, and, of course, its findings. But before that, could you please give a very warm welcome to Burkhard Jung, who is the Mayor of Leipzig. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction. Dear ministers, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy to say a warm welcome to all of you, and I'm proud to say hello to you, to welcome you in my city, and especially welcome you to this plenary session. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's very, very important that the International Transport Forum is not only looking into innovation, business trends, or technical solutions. It's very important indeed, but at the same time has also a great focus on people. And this means on cities. We have to do the job on local level. The job in the urban areas and agglomerations where most of the people of our world is living in. You talked about that. And here we are facing enormous challenges to guarantee an effective, accessible, and affordable modern urban transport and mobility system, which will suit also for future demands. Transport and mobility policies in our cities are and must be important parts of an overall city development strategy. And this requires a strong political leadership. It's our business and responsibility as political leader at local level. You know, I'm elected mayor by Leipzig citizens since 2006. So I have personally a long period of this political responsibility and have experienced a lot of new concepts, changes, and difficulties in implementing target-oriented solutions for my city. Let me give you some concrete examples. You have to know, 10 years ago, the city of Leipzig was confronted by a serious clash of problems resulting from a difficult shrinking process of the city. We lost in the 90s over 100,000 people. And the loss of inhabitants and the shrinking young population affected significantly our approach to social infrastructure for schools and kindergartens and urban mobility. By reducing the quantities and timetables of our tram network system, for example. 10 years later, we won 100,000 people. 100,000 people more, and we have to build kindergartens and schools, and we have to think about new mobility systems. Today we have 600,000 people in the city, and we are the fastest growing city in Germany, and we are confronted with totally different challenges, especially concerning the increasing demands of an expanding business community and population, and the necessity of friendly modes of transport like walking, cycling, and public transport, car and bike sharing models. Due to our investments in cycling and public transportation infrastructure, more people than ever are using those modes of transport today. For example, in case of cycling, the absolute number of trips are now 5 times higher than 15 years ago. The modal split is 18 to 20%. Of all urban trips are done by bicycles in Leipzig. And to connect the different modes of transport and to support intermodal trips, our public transportation company developed a new form of mobility stations together with the city of Leipzig and bike car sharing companies. With those stations, it's now possible to change easily from one mode of transport to another, like changing from public transportation to bike sharing, or even charge an electrical car and use another mode of transport for the way home. I think it's a future model. But positive transport development also needs not only good development concepts, but in my opinion, but an intense public participation process. Today, no single planning process of public spaces is possible without a direct involvement of our citizens. For example, the confirmation of our bicycle master plan required 35 big events with more than 1,000 suggestions from the public. This is immense and means a lot of work for my administration, but at the end, it brings input on new innovative ideas and, more important, acceptance in the public. So at the end of the day, it's up to us as political leaders to decide on the way forward and to manage and to balance the different interests. And this will go even more successfully if all levels of government, local, regional, and national, together with the private actors and the civil society, will really work closely together. Thank you for your attention, a good discussion, and maybe I can see you some of you, to my bicycle tour this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, now, earlier, in fact, before the Mayor joined us on the stage, I referred to Harvard University Graduate School of Design, Transforming Urban Transportation, the Role of Political Leadership, a very special project. And I'm delighted to say that Diane Davis, Professor Diane Davis, the project leader, is here today. So please, take us through this project and tell us what it's all about. The stage is all yours. Diane.
Well, I almost feel like I don't need to share our project because we just heard a wonderful statement from the mayor of Leipzig about the type of activities that a leader undertakes in order to push forward the agenda of, in this case, you're talking about bikes and sustainable mobility. But our project is an effort to systematize our understanding of political leadership and what it really takes to transform urban transport and really create sustainable cities. We produced 8 case studies of different cities around the world. We didn't choose Leipzig, maybe we should have chosen Leipzig, to look at different types of innovations and how they were implemented. So for a room of transport experts, many of us know what needs to be done. We know what would make a sustainable city, but the real challenge is how do you mobilize the political will and capacity to introduce the policies and implement the policies that you know need to be undertaken in order to create sustainable cities. So this project has been going on for 3.5 years. We have 8 different case studies. I have like 9 minutes. So I'm not really going to be able to say too much about the details of the project, although I do hope you will visit our website and take a look at the detailed analysis that we provide. But I see my role here today because I am fully aware that everybody is here not to listen to me, but to listen to the ministers from Argentina, Tunisia. We have commissioners, we have practitioners, politicians, global leaders who've been working on pushing the envelope with respect to sustainable mobility, and we're all going to want to learn from them in a second. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of our project with the hope that it will lay out some questions that our subsequent speakers will be able to address in their remarks to you, share a little more about political leadership understood from their own personal perspectives. So the question that I want the speakers to be thinking about is, what is the role of political leadership? What has been the role of leadership and governance in the innovations that they're going to be talking about? But that is also the defining question of our project. We looked, as I mentioned, at 8 case studies. They were all very different types of policies. Some were oriented towards shifting mode share. So we looked at BRT, we looked at valid bike lanes in France, BRT in Mexico City, we looked at congestion pricing in Stockholm, we looked at cities like Vienna where you had combinations of those shifts. We also looked at places where the gains, one might say, were a little more modest, at least in terms of infrastructure, more software than hardware. And in that sense, I'm thinking about our case study of New York City, where we looked at complete streets and pedestrianization and a variety of programs that were implemented there. We also looked at Los Angeles, a referendum to redistribute financing. So we've looked at a variety of things that have hardware, software, either financing, regulations, or actual mode shifts. But the important thing for us as we step back after 3.5 years of doing research and looked at all the different cases, the long narratives, the interviews with all the most of the political stakeholders involved, we wanted to ask ourselves whether the successful policies introduced by the leaders that we interviewed were also laying the groundwork for long-term sustainable transport change or long-term capacity for change. When we started the project, we didn't actually distinguish between just getting a policy done and then laying the groundwork for serious sustainability and governance capacity to really continue to advance sustainable mobilities. And one of the things that we found in our 8 case studies was that all of the cases had successful policies pushing back against opposition, but all we did not see as laying the same institutional and governance capacity to move the agenda forward in the long term. I actually think that's a really important thing that we can talk about here. It's one thing to get your preferred policy done. It's another thing to make sure that that policy sets the engines of change in motion. And that's one of the things that we looked at. And in our 8 case studies, we found that everybody was successful with a particular determined policy, but not all the case studies laid the foundations for governance capacity for long-term change. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we learned, what were the conditions that made policy success, and what were the conditions that moved a policy success from a one-off success to larger sustainability. And again, with the hope that we can hear some of this, more about this from some of our speakers, particularly the minister from Argentina, who's just won an award, and I would definitely put the work done in Buenos Aires in the category of laying the foundation for long-term institutional change. But the most important thing to remember is in all the cases of policy success, even the one-off successes, mayors played a really important role, as you see from our slides. So mayors, sometimes mayors had national authorities behind them, sometimes they did it on their own, but the mayor was a key actor, and as we just heard from the mayor of Leipzig, we know why. We also identified common strategies and tactics across our 8 case studies, independent of the project under consideration. And those strategies and tactics included things like pilots, experimental, short-term changes, using technologies to find public opinion. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but there were common strategies and tactics, whether you were in Seoul, Korea, or whether you were in New York City. You tried to do something as a pilot to assess what is the citizen response, and then maybe even change your program before you roll it out completely. In the Stockholm case with congestion pricing, it was a pilot and then a public referendum. Referendums were used in Los Angeles as well. A third element was that we learned in our project was the variety of what we call leadership assemblages. Even though mayors were always important, mayors were not always the single champion. So you could have a single charismatic mayor, as in the case of Seoul, South Korea, Mayor M.B. Lee, who did a major restructuring of the bus system, tore down highways, integrated buses, cabs with the subway system. It was an amazing set of projects, and he was a driving force behind that. But in other cases, we saw a variety of actors engaged in what we call distributed leadership, where no single person became identified with a project, but there were a series of actors and agents at multiple scales and multiple levels, possibly in the public as well as in the private sector as well as the public sector. And last, in all of the successful cases, you had a series amount of what we call transactional engagement, lots of interaction, lots of meetings, lots of give and take at many venues, in public meetings, in private meetings, etc. But what we also found of our cases that moved a city from a single policy success to something that really institutionalized future governance capacity was the nature, the breadth of the stakeholder engagement. Not only over time, some of the most successful cases were incremental struggles over years, if not decades, as well as working at the city, the region, and the national level. And it was the combination of struggling among public and private sector actors, so laterally or horizontally over years of time, as well as across different scales of government that ultimately helped institutionalize greater planning and policy capacity to continue to advance a single policy success onto to a much larger policy success. I'm not going to give all the details, but I just wanted to, we have one slide where I want to show you a little bit of the details of the Stockholm case. This was a successful congestion charging that was introduced in Actually, the pilots were in the early 2000s. It actually became institutionalized in law in 2005, I believe. But it was a culmination of almost 20 years of conversation and struggle among a variety of different parties at a variety of scales of government to think about tolling or using financial restrictions or incentives in order to reduce automobile traffic. So this was, to us, a quintessential case of deep, robust, long-term stakeholder engagement. I think that I would also put on the table, because we're going to be hearing more, I think, from our Commissioner Fiandeka about autonomous vehicles in Boston, if I'm right. But I do want to mention that one of our cases that we also looked at was the introduction of Uber in San Francisco. And there have been many conversations here at this forum, and I've been involved in panels talking about the smart mobility transition. That was a very important case for us because it allowed us to understand what political leadership strategies were used by the private sector in alliance with the mayor of San Francisco in order to be able to change regulation at the level of the state of California. So it was a policy success from the perspective of the proponents of smart mobility. But the point I want to make here is in this slide is that while that was a short-term policy success, the nature of the engagement, the disruption of the innovation, the short amount of time, the lack of negotiation in the public, the lack of public conversation, the fact that the mayor basically kicked the decision up to state regulators and did not deal with them in his own political backyard was a part of the reason for the success of the policy, but also part of the reason for why that change did not do anything for enhancing sustainable transportation in the city of San Francisco. And if anything, one could argue that the introduction of smart mobility tactics in the case of Uber takes public support away, citizen support away from the public sector to be able to have the social, political, and financial capacity to advance mobility, to integrate, let's say, smart mobility with the existing infrastructure of mobility in order to basically raise the tide of all boats of mobility. So I want to lay that on the table because I think that as much as we are all oriented towards changes with technology and mobility, we also want to keep in mind where shall we be putting our emphasis and our attention. If sustainable urbanism and sustainable mobility is our goal, which policies lay the groundwork for advancing along that pathway more rapidly and more directly, and which ones may just be one-off successes. So, with that background, Magdalena and I, we were talking in advance of this. We came up with a couple of questions that whether our speakers want to respond to them or not is completely up to them. But I really think that we might hear a little more, particularly from the Argentine case, but from all the speakers, a little more about the political leadership and about the scales. Where does the idea start from? Does it start in the private sector versus the public sector? Does it start at the city? Does it have to work between the city and the nation? Or does the nation have the idea on the funds end? Does it work down in the city? So asking questions, as the first one suggests, about what is the relationship between local authorities and national authorities? Are they cooperative or conflictive? And how does political leadership move in a circle or in an environment where you have different scales of governance, and maybe they are on the same page about innovations at the level of the city, and maybe they're not. I also was hoping that we could hear a little more about the nature of the policies and the extent to which they've achieved things like integrated transit and land use, which I know we'll hear about from Argentina, but is a part of what we saw in the successful cases in our study, which included Paris as well as Stockholm. And a little more about the financing of these investments. One of the appeals of Uber has been that it allows advances in transportation without putting pressure on the public sector to pay for new infrastructure. On the other hand, with Uber, the taxi industry lost its role in the city, and then the city lost revenues that they would have gotten from taxi medallions. So in some senses, the city may have been seen at a net loss rather than a gain, as compared to Stockholm, where congestion charging not only helped facilitate less congestion, better mobility, better environmental quality, more sustainability, but also generated revenues to invest in further linkages between transport and land use. So I think I'm going to end it there, and we'll move it over to hear from the main speakers today to talk a little about these and other issues. Thank you.
Diane, thank you. Thanks, Diane. Okay, so we're going to roll along now. Much mention there of Argentina. What can I say except that we have Guillermo Dietrich, who's Argentina's Minister of Transportation. You won your award. Join us on the stage. So I'm sure there's much you want to tell us about that scheme and what made it award-worthy. Guillermo Dietrich, the stage is yours.
Good morning. Thanks for the invitation to share this panel. Sorry if my English is not so fluent. At first, it was a great honor, and thank you to ITF because the award that we received yesterday night, I called the mayor, the president of Argentina, that he used to be the mayor at that time, saying that nowadays we have very challenging work, but the BRT that we did in Argentina is still receiving awards, and that is, for us, make us very happy. The award that we received was about the Metrobús 9 de Julio. Metrobús is a BRT in the 9 de Julio Avenue, 9 of July Avenue. This avenue is the widest avenue in Argentina. Some people say that it's the widest in the world. I think that the widest avenue are in China nowadays. And it's a very iconic place of our country. If someone of you knows Argentina, in that avenue is the obelisk. That is very characteristic from our city and our country. This BRT is used by 255,000 people every day, are 11 bus lines, and is an area of the city, the most dense area, that every day 1 million people is around using the buses, cars, pedestrians, cyclists, etc. This was the most successful public policy from the city, and one of the more successful in the country, this Metrobús that we have constructed. But being the topic of this meeting, governance, I want to share, and Diana challenged me a little about that, how was the governance of this process, because it was very particular. Buenos Aires City is a 3 million people city, where every day other 3 million people come to the city from a metropolitan area that included Buenos Aires. We are 15 million people. It has a huge bus system. Every day we are 12 million trips by bus. And there is the national level, because the federal government is in Buenos Aires City. The Buenos Aires City government, there is nothing between the national level and Buenos Aires City. And 42 municipalities that are in the metropolitan area. At that time, we were running the city of Buenos Aires. Nowadays, the former mayor is the president of Argentina. I used to be the Secretary of Transport of the city. And the national government, it was a very oppositive government that blocked all the measures that we tried to do in the city. And the jurisdiction of the passes is under the national government jurisdiction. because that we have a city the jurisdiction of the street, as is obviously, but the contract with the buses companies, it is and it was under the national government jurisdiction. Because that, being our policy to be very focused in improve public transit, we must be very innovative because we are changing something that it wasn't under our jurisdiction with the opposition of the national government. That took us to be very creative how we can do a BRT in that conditions, and that made us to be to modify the standard BRT systems. I don't know if you know that the BRT born in Curitiba in the 70s, then Bogota in the 90s, and from Bogota has been growing all around the world. What we did was, we didn't change the two routes of the bus lanes, we didn't change the vehicles of the bus companies, but we did exclusive lines for the buses with physical separation. We constructed very important bus stations between 400, 500 meters, one from the other. Very focused in making faster the trip for the people, more comfortable and more safety. But going out from the typical standards of a BRT system. The result was amazing. In Metrobús 9 de Julio, for example, reduced the time of the trips from 50 minutes to less than 20 minutes. The opinion of the acceptance of the system has 90% of acceptance. We constructed finally 84 kilometers of Metrobús, some of them now by the nation in other cities. And nowadays, the BRT system is used in Argentina 1.8 million trips. But the importance of this is that perhaps the successful of the BRT system in Argentina, it was because the flexibility that we incorporate to the system, and this flexibility we incorporated because the lack of jurisdiction that we had over the buses, and that was something that we must implement it because these restrictions, and hopefully, perhaps was one of the keys of the success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If you could stay with us, so don't go quite yet, because there will be other ministers who will be joining us, because we just heard here about the Argentinian experience. And I'd now like to invite to the stage Nicolae Asul, who is the Deputy Minister of Transport of the Russian Federation, to give us a handle on what is happening in his country. So, Minister, if you care to join us on the stage. Nicolae Asul, thank you very much.
Доброе утро, дамы и господа.
Ladies and gentlemen, Russian is one of the working languages of the ITF, so I take the liberty to speak Russian. It is with great pleasure that I participate for the 5th time here in this summit in Leipzig. I can say that these meetings take place on a high level of quality. The agenda is always great, and there is progress, there is development. When in former days we said, let us change our point of views, maybe urban development should focus on pedestrians, cyclists, public transport, and then individual transport. So now this focus has changed. But this is also due to practical experiences. I think we all know what we are talking about. Today we talk about different kinds of mobility. We talk about a quality enhancement. We consider the environment. In Russia, for example, this year is the year of the environment. Our federal legislation has transferred competences to regions so that in parts of the cities, limitations can be introduced on transport or traffic, and special road signage has been introduced that has been rolled out throughout the country. So now in every city there are historic areas, protected historic areas, where the limitations are quite strict when it comes to using your vehicle in these zones. Plus, we tighten our limitations on fuels to be used. We try to introduce more electromobility. We use electrobuses. We form partnerships between urban authorities and public transport operators so as to be able to bundle forces and roll out more electromobility. For example, we built gas stations where you can also charge your electric car. Well, and then we would have to rank our country. We ranked first when it came to the number of congestions, and now at least we have fallen back on the 4th rank. Then we have also introduced a parking fee, and we're quite progressive because you can pay by the minute. We do not use parking meters anymore where you have to tip and throw in your money, but we all use it via apps or text messages, so they're quite easy to operate. And of course, it is always important to actively cooperate with the citizens. At the beginning, our citizens were worried that they now had to pay for something that used to be for free when it came to parking spaces, for example. But when they realized that the money then was spent on the improvement of road and transport conditions instead of simply seeping away somewhere, when they saw that the pedestrian walkways were wider and the trees were planted and there were parking spaces for free for residents, then the attitude of our citizens changed. We have passed a federal law that enables mayors to introduce a congestion charge. Of course, many laws were passed. Before it can be actually passed, some issues will have to be solved. Now our citizens are worried that mayors will not use it to cut down on the use of cars, but that they will simply use it to increase their budget. And this is why we try to develop methods that always involve the public. And it is important to, at the same time, improve public transport. This congestion charge will make a contribution to strengthen public transport instead of simply being yet another tax for our citizens. We believe that it's also important to harmonize the requirements for all the payment systems. In Moscow, for example, it's a very positive development. We have developed one payment card. 1 million of those payment cards has already been issued, and you can use all modes of transports with that card. So it's just one payment card for the subway, for buses, for everything. And of course, it would be a good idea to roll it out nationwide so that you could use this card to pay for your public transport all over the country. We've already spoken about the football championships. There will be 11 cities involved, and we will provide people with one payment card that will allow them to travel from one city to another. And when it comes to cabs, we have the largest taxi fleet in Europe. So that's quite a number of cars, but car sharing also develops nicely. We have a good railway system within the city, and there is another rail ring in and around Moscow. We have a very good metro system where the intervals between trains are very short. 50% of the bus fleet in Moscow have just been renewed. And we also have a smart transport system in our urban area. Approximately 150,000 video cameras are installed, and they show in real time online if traffic rules were not complied with, so that also helps us to increase safety on our roads. And then there is another federal law on the organization of road transport. These legal acts used to focus on safety, and now we have shifted the focus to efficiency and speed, and not only safety alone. So it comprises more. And we also put our focus not only on the development of the urban systems, but we broaden our view on the agglomeration, because there are many commuters traveling into the city on a daily basis, and this is why obviously our transport system cannot stop at the borders of the city. It has to be possible to travel into and out of the city. Now I would like to thank you once again. The International Transport Forum is always full of new ideas, and we have heard many interesting things. Thank you very much.
Because our third minister will now join us on the stage, could you please welcome Anis Kadera, who is the Minister of Transport for Tunisia. Please, the stage is yours.
Chers collègues, mesdames
colleagues, hello. Allow me, please, to first of all say how happy I am to be here. The story of public transport in Tunisia has been going on for 130 years now. The first railway line was founded and inaugurated in 1872, and this railway line is still around. It's from Tunis to the Colette area. The history of public transport in Tunisia has been influenced and shaped by different kinds of policies. There is a public transport network which has been extended upon and expanded. We have trams, trolley buses, trains, underground systems, tube systems, and a fast train system which is now being expanded as we speak. And in October 2018, it will be inaugurated. Those policies have made it possible to use a legislative framework to create a large-scale infrastructure. We have a large pool of vehicles. The cities in Tunisia have a highly developed network of buses. We have 3,400 buses in Tunis, 192 kilometers of a railway network, which we've got in Tunisia. The network is operated by two operators, SNCFD, the national railway company in Tunisia, and then there is the city railway system, as well as the underground system in Tunis, and a railway line, or railway lines rather, among these cities, and a transport network for different modes of transport. There is Tunis-La Marsa. This is a road connecting Tunis with surrounding cities. 4 lines in the conurbation of Tunis, and 12 regional companies assuring regional transport. So we've got a network in Tunisia comprising all states. Over the last couple of years, our population has grown very much. Cities have grown as well. With our network of transports, we try to keep abreast of developments in order to have a good offer of services. We have caught up, but as far as rolling stock is concerned, the development of rolling stock, we have to do more. Over the last decades, we have invested a lot in road infrastructure, and we have mainly focused on the road. This has had an impact on the environment, of course. More fuel has been consumed, more greenhouse gases were emitted, and road safety has been impaired. Now we want to improve the quality of life of our cities, of our citizens. We want to foster social cohesion, want to lower vulnerability to climate change. Hence, in our 5-year plan, 2016 to 2020, we have come up with a strategy for good governance and to improve the transport system. There is an ambitious plan. We want to develop collective transport. That has been a strategic decision. 45% of the investment now goes to public transport. I would like to mention the network around the conurbation of Tunis. This is a large-scale project to the tune of 1.5 million euros. And with that, we want to achieve a situation that more than 600,000 people from the conurbation of Tunis can use this network as of October 2018. An operating company was set up in order to implement this project. Besides that, we will have a change center in Barcelona Square, in the center of Tunis, where people can change modes of transport. We will also modernize other centers, spending 90 million euros. Sfax, the second largest city in Tunis, will get an underground system. So we've got bus lines and underground lines forming this new network, more than 160 kilometers in total. And it costs about 700,000 euros. For that, we have also set up an operating company to accelerate this project and to operate the network. We have also started modernizing our rolling stock for the underground system as well as the railway system. Within the framework of the 5-year plan, 16 to 20, new buses will be bought, more than 50 tram lines, and we will modernize 120 underground lines. We have already started with this project. This project will improve the quality of services, and the operators will be able to serve the population better, in a better way. Modernization is one of our main priorities. We want to create a higher degree of satisfaction for our consumers, for our passengers. We will create a portal providing open data in order to make sure that transport in Greater Tunis is improved. As far as good governance is concerned, we have set up regional administrative bodies. Pilot projects have been rolled out in Tunis, the capital, but also in Sfax, the second largest city in Tunisia. There have been legal reforms to restructure the system, especially where there are structural problems. Also, we want to improve competitiveness of the transport companies in order to fight climate change and in order to reach our targets for COP22. For COP22, we have the target of substantially reducing CO2 emissions. You know, after power generation, the transport sector is the second worst emitter of greenhouse gases. To conclude, I would like to say we will have an ambitious program for infrastructure, for legal and institutional reforms, to optimize the efficiency of transport. There are really big deficits, and we have to overcome that situation. I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that, a very comprehensive analysis of what is happening in Tunisia. Now, time is running very tight, and I'm conscious that we do have another presentation to hear. So before you go, this is a question that I would like to put to all of you. If you could answer it very, very briefly, is the question of scale. Which is the best scale to advance sustainable urban mobility and accessibility? The best scale to advance sustainable urban mobility and accessibility. Very briefly, please, Guillermo.
City scale.
Okay. I said brief, and it was brief. Minister, your response to that question, very briefly, please. Nikolai. Is which is the best scale to advance sustainable urban mobility and accessibility? Very briefly, please, sir.
It's the city system which is to be integrated, I would say. So the city is the unit I find best suited.
Excellent. And Anis Gadere, your response to the same question, please. Would you like me to repeat the question? Oui. Of course. The question was, which is the best scale to advance sustainable urban mobility and accessibility?
I would say all stakeholders are affected by mobility or the issues of mobility and access. On the one hand, we've got the political decision makers establishing large-scale strategies in countries together with bilateral agreements with your neighboring countries, for instance, so as to improve mobility in large scale, but also internal stakeholders, also individuals and their well-being will have to be considered, as transport is a very important field in order to make people's lives easier. So I think there is a split responsibility at all levels. The city, of course, also the large-scale decision makers in a country, or a forum like this can be an opportunity to foster an exchange of opinions, to create links and to create networks.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Could you please show your appreciation to our three ministers from Argentina, the Russian Federation and Tunisia. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Quite a few presentations. In fact, we're going to shift geographical location. Feels like a mini tour of the world. Boston has a reputation as a walking city, but its transport department has a twofold job to advance public and transportation safety whilst managing the city's street network. To tell us all about it is Gina Fiandaca. She is the Commissioner of the Boston Transportation Department. The stage is yours, Gina.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. We've heard from such an impressive array of speakers already, so I'll try to be brief and just sort of give you the snapshot of the City Transportation Commissioner's perspective here. And our perspective really is that collaboration and partnerships are key to meeting our mobility goals and providing safe, accessible, and reliable transportation for everyone. Breaking down silos, coordinating with our public health department, our police department, our schools, our elderly commission, and data scientists all help us set priorities that are equitable and that protect our most vulnerable users. And going beyond engineering, using creative and non-traditional public outreach methods to involve people who have not traditionally been part of the process. That's critical to gaining support for all of your mobility initiatives. And collaboration with advocates. Constructive advocacy can really help raise the bar and educate the public and extend the reach of you as a public servant. And collaboration with other cities. Pilot testing and learning and sharing through national groups. In the United States, we have the National Association of City and Transportation Officials, NACTO, which is a key partner for the city of Boston, as well as Vision Zero focused cities. They all help us to innovate and make changes more quickly and with more confidence, and even in advance our federal guidelines. They're our voice. They extend our reach, just as our advocacy groups do. So what's going on in Boston right now? In March of this year, we finished up a 2-year-long planning effort, which was Go Boston 2030, the first long-range transportation plan in Boston in 15 years. All of this is online. It's goboston2030.org. And what this was an engagement of the community. We went out into the community in the winter of 2015, which was a historical winter in the city of Boston. And we started this process with a question campaign. We had a truck that went all throughout the city, and it was an online campaign as well. But we visited every neighborhood in the city at different times, in the morning, at night, on weekends. And we wanted to ask, what's your question about transportation? How do you want to get around in the future? What's your vision? Tell us. So that started this whole process. And what emerged from it were action groups and visioning sessions from that. From the question campaign alone, we heard from over 6,000 people. And from our visioning sessions, we reached another 4,000. You can read every single question online, and you can read all about our visioning sessions online. All of that information is very transparent. So what came out of that? 12 themes. And the top 3 of those themes formed our vision and our action plan. And those were safety, access, and reliability. So in terms of safety, our target is to eliminate traffic fatalities and severe injuries by 2030. How are we doing that? Primarily through our adoption of Vision Zero and focusing on the most vulnerable users, older adults, children, people with disabilities, and providing walking and biking infrastructure that promotes safe mobility. Projects and priorities that are supported by crash data, again, making use of our data scientists to inform us, and recognizing the need to make meaningful changes sooner, not just by responding, but also by identifying locations and key priorities that need these improvements. We also kicked off an initiative called Neighborhood Slow Streets. This is an application process. We invited community groups and community members to apply for our Neighborhood Slow Streets program. We have 2 target areas in the city that are already well underway. And through this application process, we heard from 37 different community groups that want us to go in and make tactical improvements in key corridors throughout the city. This is an unprecedented, really, level of request for this from neighborhoods, and we're able to choose probably 4 or 5 of those locations. So the applications are scored objectively, and that's another process that's fully transparent. It'll be out on our website. People can read about how we rolled that out and how the top 5 sort of rose to the top there. In terms of access, Our target is to ensure that every home in Boston is within a 10-minute walk of a rail station or a key bus route, a bike share station, and car share. In terms of bicycling, a major goal from Go Boston 2030 is a plan to increase the number of households within a 5-minute walk of a low-stress bike route. And we want to create a connected network of these low-stress routes, whether through traffic calming on local streets or increased separation of bike lanes on larger arterials. And people bike for different reasons, so our networks need to connect people from their homes to job centers, to open space, and within their own main streets districts. Major expansion of our public bike share system is already underway, and next year we will be adding 70 new stations in the city of Boston. And every fall and spring, we do an extensive outreach program to our children. We go into schools and we teach them how to safely ride a bike. We bring our bikes, we bring safety apparatus. We take children who have never been on a bike and maybe for some reasons can't own a bike. And we provide them with the bike and teach them safe bicycling. We also teach women safe bicycling. Sometimes women, we found that they're not part of the conversation because they're not comfortable riding a bike or they haven't ridden a bike in a long time. So we have programs to teach women how to ride bikes and to reinitiate them to that activity. In terms of transit, provide really robust crosstown connections. And what we can do on our city part is provide the traffic signal infrastructure to support that, to give priority to transit, and to work with our own Department of Transportation to advance bus rapid transit in partnership with them. And finally, in terms of reliability, our target is that Bostonians' average commute time to work will decrease by 10%. And how are we doing that? Through maintenance, with a higher focus on maintaining our existing infrastructure, improved signals for better coordination for vehicular traffic, as well as the aforementioned transit priority, and a transportation network that really needs to function robustly year-round, with an emphasis on enforcing snow clearance ordinances, partnerships with business groups and large housing developments, and investments in new equipment to clear and maintain our separated bike lanes. So we heard about what's the capacity for long-term change from Diane. This is our capacity for long-term change. Our mayor in Boston made it very clear that Go Boston 2030 is a vision and action plan. This is informing our policies for the future, and this is not a plan that will sit on a shelf and we'll take out and dust off and see what we wrote every few years. This is an action plan that will provide us with the direction to move the city forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity to address you.
Thank you. Gina, thanks for that. So Boston, an example of smart thinking along the lines that Diane referred to in her introduction. But how essential is the private sector, partnerships with the private sector in fulfilling these goals? Because the ultimate goal as well is to meet the Sustainable Development Goals.
Sure, the private sector is key to this. In Boston, we just opened a new transit station, which is a great example of a public-private partnership. It's a brand new transit station, and it was financed by New Balance, which is a sneaker and sportswear company. And it's sort of revitalizing the entire area of this particular part of the city and this neighborhood, and opening up not only mobility options, but also development options. So what can the city do for that? We've already implemented some resident parking restrictions to protect some of the parking around the new transit station. But what that's also doing is spurring the impetus for that continued engagement that was really the vision of a private developer that they worked with not only the city, but also primarily with the state and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and our Department of Transportation.
Okay, Gina Payandaka, thank you so much for that analysis of what is happening in Boston. shouldn't really be called a walking city because you can do so much more than that, but thank you. Okay, so quite a few points have emerged from this session. The need for very important actors. We saw that from the demonstration we had there from Diane at the beginning of this session. In her case, she identified the mayors, key players. Also, learning to think smart. Some cities do, some cities don't. But look, this is now your opportunity as the audience to get involved, to actually put questions to members of our panel. If there's something you want to put to them, be it a question or a comment, then please feel free to raise your hand. There will be people with microphones, so raise your hand, and also when you introduce yourself, if you could also name the organisation that you represent. Now, I do know, I've been told in advance that there is somebody who wishes to put a question to our representative from the Russian Federation. So if they could make themselves known so that we could actually bring a microphone to you. Gentleman over there, so just over there. Could you introduce yourself, please, and the organisation that you represent?
Thank you very much. I'm from the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. I'm a director for Transport Division. I have a question to His Excellency, Deputy Minister of Russian Federation. I have visited Moscow many times in the past 20 years, and then I observed there are difficulties in the past, and also the big improvements in the recent years. And maybe Deputy Minister can share one or two key good practices for such a big change in Moscow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your question. I'm aware of the fact that you've traveled to Moscow many times. Well, last year in Moscow, there was a UN conference of ministers that takes place every 5 years, and we introduced our infrastructure to the ministers. Personally, as an inhabitant of Moscow, I'd be more precise, saying that for me it was especially important that pedestrian zones were established. Over the past year, the use of just walking tours has increased by 31%. We used to squeeze along the buildings to get around the cars, and now you can find pedestrian walkways in the center of Moscow, sometimes even wider than the lanes for cars. And then there are many pedestrian zones in Moscow where cars do not have access. The city has become more comfortable, greener, and we feel safer. Secondly, there are many new bike lanes now. We built a few stations where you can rent a bike, and on the initiative of the Ministry of Transport, we organized a festival for cyclists. We did so in 50 Russian cities at the same time on the same day, and then all the roads are closed and it's people cycling on the streets. 40,000 people participated in this festival in Moscow. We closed the Garden Ring and it was only open to cyclists. Of course, when talking about public transport, then in Moscow we mostly talk about the subway, because the Moscow subway moves around many, many passengers. In 2010, we opened 75 new stations, and until 2020, we will have to open 12 new subway stations per year. We built a new railway ring in Moscow, and that is well integrated into public transport. You can use one fare ticket, one payment card to use all modes of transports. And what is quite popular is car sharing. It develops in such a dynamic and speedy way as in no other towns. And of course, that improves our roads.
that any member of the audience, or indeed comments, would like to put to our guest speakers. The gentleman here, over here, please, the microphone is on its way. If you could introduce yourself and name the organisation that you represent.
Thank you. My name is Bernard Ensink. I'm representing the European Cyclist Federation and the World Cycling Alliance. Two comments. One is we are so grateful and amazed about the high level of the strong case for cycling that is made in this final session. From Leipzig, from Russia, from Boston, really amazing stories. And this shows that cycling as a mode is taken now much more serious than 10 years ago on the city level, but even, of course, on the national level. My second remark is just shortly to report from our side event on walking and cycling in the frame of this governance theme at this conference. We should not forget that the national level really matters in getting on the ground in the cities a good high level of cycling and walking. We had very good examples from Denmark, from the Netherlands, from Germany, that funding from the national level and taking the global discussions about climate change and health, the obesity crisis, etc., really matters to get something really good on the ground in cities. So please do not forget the national governments should take responsibility and support all these amazing local leaders that are representing here for cycling. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Excellent. Thumbs up for cycling. Guillermo, I know that you wanted to respond. Please, feel free. A microphone's on its way.
Yes. Thanks for your reflection. A comment about Buenos Aires. I didn't talk about cyclists, but we were aggressive, very aggressive also in improving the condition to cycle in Argentina. In 2008, almost nobody cyclist used a bicycle in Buenos Aires city. Nowadays are every day 250,000 trips by bike, mostly to go to work. We have done 160 on-street protected bike lines in the city, also in downtown. And as national government, we are supporting the cities with the BRTs. The BRTs are fully financed by the national government, and we are beginning to finance bike lines also in the city and pedestrian streets. We are trying to work together with the design to have the same design all around the country, and also we are working in national laws for electric bicycles and the use of how the electric, not vehicles, the personal electrical mobility can be used in the cities.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to ask some questions at all? Please feel free. I can't see any hands raised. No? Ah, yes, one. Yes, Maz. Please introduce yourself and your organisation.
Thank you. My name is Måns Lonroth. I'm essentially representing myself, but I used to be a member of the board of the Volvo Research and Educational Foundations. And I have a question for Boston. I was struck by the fact that one of the three top items was access. So I would like to understand if you think that you have a good enough language and metrics for discussing access. We all talk about access nowadays, but I think we still lack the language and the metrics for it. What's your view on this?
Sure. There you go. You like this stage, don't you?
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question. Access can have a few different meanings for us. One meaning for access is certainly in terms of access to disabled community, but access to some of us also includes access to underserved members of our community. And in terms of what we mean by access in Go Boston 2030, it is twofold. But access to underserved members of our community means that we need to, first of all, identify what those gaps are in the transportation network And how do we work to address them? How do we move people from one part of the city to job centers that sometimes for just a couple of miles can take them 45 minutes to an hour? And how do we do that with a public transit system that doesn't operate overnight? Whereas some of our members of those communities work third shifts, so they don't have options to get to the job centers. How do we move people within their own neighborhoods and across town? So that's what the foundation was for Access and Go Boston 2030, and that's really our challenge.
Okay, thank you. Now, before we wrap up this session, there is one more question, one last question, in fact, the gentleman over there in the blue tie. And after that, we'll be hearing from Yuriria Mascot Perez, who is the Undersecretary of Transport for Mexico, please.
Thank you. Most of you have seen me. I'm José Viegas, the Secretary General. It's not a question, but it's somehow a reply to the question that Mans just raised. Because we raised that question a year ago in our Corporate Partnership Board, and just yesterday we released a full report of about 50 pages called Linking Places and People, in which we went through the whole range of definitions of access and how you can measure it and how you can map it, including a very interesting study of how to calculate access when you're moving on a bike. Because of the question of slopes and the question of traffic, it's very different from measuring the distances or the times if you're moving on a car, including the question of access for people with physical limitations or mental limitations. So there's a lot there. I would encourage you to pick up copies if they're still available, but anyway, they're all freely downloadable from our website. It's within the Corporate Partnership Board area, and it's called Linking Places and People. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can I now give the stage to Yuriria Mascot Perez, the Undersecretary of Transport for Mexico. Thank you. All yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Muy buenas tardes a todos.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, representatives of the member countries of the International Transport Forum, friends. With satisfaction, we close the International Transport Forum 2017. This year, we focused on a very important topic, governance of transport. We spent 3 days together with transport ministers, entrepreneurs, experts from, by now, 59 member countries, and from the point of view of governance, we discussed the challenges for infrastructure, global connectivity, regulations of innovations, and we also talked about the inclusive access to sustainable urban public transport. Gerardo Ruiz Esparza stated in his inaugural speech that there is no such challenge of a local nature. They are all of a global nature by now, and this is why all countries focus on cooperation and must focus on cooperation. In this context, it's all the more important that the ministerial declaration was signed and all the member states of the ITF signed it. In this ministerial declaration, the ministers point out that governance of transport has to live up to the rapid changes of our world, and at the same time, targets and demands have to be harmonized with the responsibilities and resources so as to find solutions for sustainable development. I would like to say that this year was a very full year, a busy year for Mexico. But there are 2 points that I would like to highlight. There are new rules and regulations and open processes where many countries are involved. We elected a new Secretary General, and I would like to congratulate Dr. Yong Tae Kim for his new term as a Secretary General, and we wish him all the best for this new period of his life that is about to start. So let's give him an applause. Another point that I would like to highlight is that this year in our International Transport Forum, we saw an increase of 30% when it comes to the turnout. We all traveled to the beautiful city of Leipzig, 30% more of us than last year. That's a great challenge and that's a great responsibility that all our countries bear in transport. So I think we can congratulate ourselves because we've broken yet another record. And in particular, I would like to thank Mr. José Viegas. It's his work and it's his leadership qualities that over the past few years, and I think we all agree here, to turn the forum into a pioneering institution for research, analysis, and discussion in transport. José, we're convinced that the Secretary General, José Viegas, will leave traces in this forum, an international transport forum that has become more global and more dynamic and more innovative. It's a forum that has adapted to our rapidly changing world. So a great thanks goes to you, José. Mexico now passes on the presidency to a country that is our friend. It's Latvia. We wish you all the best. Congratulations. We know that you will have a lot of work and we hope that you will be very successful over the next year. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to repeat that it has been a great honor for Mexico to hold the presidency of ITF this year. Of course, it meant a lot of work, but we learned a lot and we were successful. And it allowed us to deepen our relationships to other countries. It would be unjust not to say thank you to the cooperation, the professionalism, and the support of the entire team of the Secretariat of the International Transport Forum. It was great. So once again, thanks to José, Mary, Beth, Sharon, Sarah, Paula, Magda, and please do pass on our thank you to all those people whose names I do not even know, all those belonging to the great team that cooperated with us. So let's give them an applause. Sometimes you do not see the people, but they all stand behind this great forum. With the support of all the member countries, we have managed to bring important topics forward that have not only improved the dialogue and the atmosphere within the organization, but that have also tried to generate an added value for the society. Mr. Peña Nieto and Mexico have developed a approach with global responsibility. It's a country that supports the world and shows solidarity and supports people in need. And this is why now we pass on the presidency of the International Transport Forum, full of satisfaction, but also fully convinced that we will continue our work as a member of the ITF, because transport, without doubt, is one of the main pillars of development for all countries. So once again, thank you, and let us continue working for safety and security, our topic of next year. Thanks to all.
But Perez, who is the Undersecretary of Transport in Mexico. So really, I'd like to extend my thanks to everybody, but in particular to the lady in the orange jacket, Mary Crass. Come on. Don't be shy, Mary. She's kept me calm throughout this. It's all yours.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. But before José Viegas comes and closes our 2.5 days of summit, I'd like to say a few words. First of all, thanks to you all for being here. But second of all, and perhaps importantly for today, this is on behalf of all of my colleagues at the International Transport Forum, on behalf of your staff, José. I'd like to express to you, in front of this very distinguished audience, our appreciation for your leadership of the ITF over the last 5 years. During your tenure, Jose, as Secretary General, you brought our organization to new heights of recognition and respect, and to greater breadth and depth of substantive expertise. You arrived with a vision for a stronger, more robust organization centered on value for members and the transport community as well. You also came with a timeline that set the cadence for rapid change. I personally will not forget when you first arrived, my first day back at the office after a very restful summer holidays. I opened my email, and there was an email from you, my new boss, that said, please come to my office. And so I thought, this is going to be just a general sort of introduction to the ITF and its issues and his views about how to get started, et cetera, et cetera. And then you asked me to sit down in full view of your computer screen, and you popped open a vast Excel spreadsheet, and you announced, this is how I'd like to bring funding reform to the ITF. And onward we went. Hang on to your hat, I said to myself. And the ensuing 5 years brought many more moments like this for all of us that have had the pleasure to serve the ITF under Jose's shepherding. We're struck, and I think this is collectively and individually, by the amazing creativity that you bring, your unique vision, and your absolutely, mind-blowingly, indefatigable energy that you've brought to the institutional challenges of the ITF, as well as to the development of a horizon-pushing research agenda for the organization. And it's been an honor and a pleasure to be a part of the development of all of that. I know I speak for all of us, Jose, your staff, my wonderful colleagues, when I say that your leadership has enabled all of us to develop our understanding of the complexities of transport sector dynamics, and it has allowed us to each push forward the boundaries of our professional experience in ways that some of us had not anticipated. And thank you, I think on behalf of all of us, for that. Now, as you move forward to new horizons, Jose, we look forward to working with you, Young Tae, there you are, as our new forthcoming Secretary General. And for now, could I ask my colleagues here in the room to join me in saluting you, Jose, and in wishing you our very, very best as you move on. Everybody stand up.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you all. Let me start by quoting Undersecretary Irida Mascot. What she said about the Mexican presidency, I can say about my period at the ITF. It's been a lot of work, but there's also been a lot of learning and a lot of pleasure. It's probably one of the most challenging decisions of my life, but probably one of the best, was to have the courage to leave my comfortable position as full professor at University of Lisbon when I was just turning 59, and apply for this job. And then was lucky enough to win it. And then to come and live in Paris like a slightly older Erasmus student and commute to Lisbon on the weekends at the moment that the family was just beginning to have the grandchildren. But I don't regret it one moment. It's been some of the best 5 years in my life. Thanks to the staff and thanks to you. It's been an incredible exercise in learning. I had no experience in leading a political organization. I had always worked in the public sector, but within the confines of university, which is a very different environment. And so the first thing was I learned a lot from my colleagues who had been there. Mary in particular was absolutely fundamental with her unparalleled skills for diplomacy and to say no with a smile and not budge and keep smiling and iterating until we get there. I can recognize that I have a lot of imagination and a lot of energy, yes. But probably my greatest merit here has been to lead this fantastic team of people, leaving them the breathing space for their own initiatives. Set the guiding lines and leave them the space so that they can bring their own talents and make the adjustments as they see fit. And then give the feedback of what is going well and not so well. And only like this, it would have been possible to do what we have done. So I was l'agent provocateur, much more than the executioner. And as our visibility and prestige have grown, we have been able to recruit from an always widening set of candidates, brilliant young people we've hired in the last 2 or 3 years. We have doubled the size of our staff, and we have multiplied by 3 the number of pages we produce per year, and we keep reports shorter now, and we have multiplied by 7 the number of web visits, and by 20 the number of minutes that our videos are watched. And so I think that it is true, and I'm very proud, that all of us have been able to put the ITF at the place that I think it should be, as the only intergovernmental organization in the world that covers all transport modes. I sincerely hope that we will be able to go on expanding the number of members to cover other regions of the world in which we are not present. And I hope that we can also continue to expand the Corporate Partnership Board, which had a critical influence on the development of the ITF. I still remember there's something that Mary did not say about that first moment. Because in that spreadsheet, it's true that the spreadsheet was there, but the spreadsheet included something, which was a 5% budget cut. I arrived on August 13. And if she had a shocking first moment with me, I had a shocking first moment with my head of the management unit. Nick was there, he is in the meantime retired, and he told me, José, sit down, I have good news and bad news. Which one you want first? I said, you choose. I said, okay, I'll start with the good news. The staff is so happy that you were elected. I had collaborated earlier with the ECMT, some of the people knew me, they're so happy that it's with you. Good. So now the bad news. I have news that a very influential European member has a letter ready to be signed saying that if you don't quickly reduce significantly their financial participation, they will drop out. So if you want a hammer in your head on the first day, that's it. Yang Tae, I don't think there is a letter like that ready this time. Huh? And in fact, the disproportion of contributions between the Europeans and the non-Europeans was shocking. So the threat seemed realistic. And I thought, I have to find a way to gain time. And for that, I had to show this resolve to reduce it, knowing that the budget was very short. A couple of hours later, I was going with him. This was middle of August, so there was very few staff. I was going with him through the staff, which I was not aware when I applied and when I won. And I saw that we had a total of 32 staff, of which only 6 researchers. How can you do the mandate of being a think tank, covering 5 transport modes, 5 continents, with 6 researchers? I had led at university a team of 28 researchers. I had a consultancy of 35 people, so very similar to the 32, but in those 35, 25 were researchers. So I knew what it took, and it was impossible. And then the idea of bringing the corporate sector was more or less inevitable. I think we were very fortunate in having found a good configuration. But I must tell you, the first reaction of the countries when I presented this, 2 months after I arrived, I was so worried that the inspiration came from the adrenaline. When I presented it the first time, the reactions were very hostile. Some of the countries even said, are we going to sleep with the enemy? Now, I have the countries saying, when can we have more collaboration between our research centers and the corporate partners? This is possibly the most fundamental of the changes we have achieved. So there's been a lot of pleasure in getting to these things. I could stay here for another 5 years telling you the stories of the 5 years, but I won't do that. Let me just say we are now at the end of this summit, and we all have heard and interacted with ministers and other leaders. We've taken part in multiple exchanges of experiences and ideas, made new contacts that open possibilities for further exchange and projects. As was already mentioned by Riria, we've beaten the record of number of participants, but also of countries. We've had 80 countries. That's 23 more countries than we had members at the beginning. We've just had the minister of Tunisia, who is not yet a member country, and I underline yet, being with us all the time and participating in this final session. Governance of transport covers a lot of issues, but I think we were wise enough to divide it in these 4 streams, which were very helpful to structure the discussion. We also brought you some of the recent work of the ITF in dedicated sessions to that, and in all cases, the rooms were full, and we had very strong attention to that. We also presented to you the first version of the visualization tool for our decarbonizing transport project, which I hope, and I think, I'm sure, will be very influential in the process of decarbonizing. So, thank you all for coming to Leipzig. Several of you, each of these 5 years, some others only a few, and some of you only this year. What I would say is keep coming, because it will keep going better. The summaries of all sessions are already on the website. The presentations are available for download. Many of the sessions have been video streamed live, and the videos are available there. As usual, we will make all outputs available free of charge. I want to have my sincere thanks to all of those that made this possible. I cannot mention all, but I have to start, of course, with Mexico. Your drive, your inspiration, if you allow me, your smile, made it so much easier for us to see your commitment in having this. Yours and, of course, Minister Ruiz Esparza. And Hannah. I cannot forget Hannah, because she, not only for the summit, but for the whole year. Germany, the host country, and Minister Alexander Dobrindt. Mayor Burkhard Jung. And from this year, the first time, the region of Saxony and Prime Minister Tillich were again a source of inspiration and support. A huge thanks to our sponsors. This runs so well, and I think you will not be surprised if I say it's pretty expensive to have it so well organized. So the sponsors also have a very significant role. Bombardier, the diamond sponsor, gold sponsors, INTP Mexico and DECRA, as well as Deutsche Bahn, our mobility partner. And then I won't call it the invisible hand, sometimes they're visible, but the team here, the interpreters and the liaison officers, the regies of Compact Team led by Lydia. Where is she? Lydia, come here, please. Lydia, as you can see, is a thin lady. Sometimes she is the personification of the magic wand, because she solves things. Sometimes even before the thing is a problem. I won't tell you the details, but I've changed almost real time some of my slides for the previous presentation. She always told me, Jose, no problem, it's done. In the lectern we have on the sessions, they have me come here and adjust the height of the place where we put our hands, so that because of that, the distance between myself and the microphone is as it will be on the day. And this controls the level of amplification of the sound I have. So it's on these details. It matters. And she knows how to do it. So Lydia, bravo. Yeah, of course, I know. You're the visible part of the magical wand. Then the fantastic team of CCL under André Kaldenhoff and Katja Lehmann. Again, another part of the invisible hand. The photographers, the video operators, all of you guys. Last but not least, our own secretariat people. It's an incredible. I've been in many conferences and I've even organized some before in my previous life. And I've seen very often the size of the team that is organizing it. The ITF team in charge of the summit is composed of a total of 7. It's almost unbelievable. But that's because of that lady. Where is she? Mary. I was calling her last year's the queen of the summit. After 10 summits, I think she deserves to be called the empress of the summit. Mary. As you all know, this is my last summit as Secretary General of the ITF. So I leave with this mixed feeling of great pride for the achievements we've had and of sadness for the separation. But I'm leaving it in very capable hands. I've known Yang Tae for the last 2 years, as he has been the Korean delegate to the TMB. He has been a passionate follower, an avid inquirer of why is this like this, why is it like that? And I'm sure he will go in different directions, that's so much the better, but keep it in a good route. So Yang Tae, now come here to me so that they start seeing your face more often, because they're getting saturated with my face. And as you already know, next year it's safety and security in transport. And so the best way to start that is to have a safe return trip home. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. And before you do that, have a safe bicycle ride, because don't forget, the Mayor of Leipzig, he's invited you to go cycling with him this afternoon in about just under 10 minutes' time, possibly a little bit more than that, but there will be references outside the hall giving you the directions and where to meet. So in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today, in fact, for the last 2 days. And thank you, in fact, Jose, thank you. And to your successor. Ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next year. Thank you.